All right, so this is an excellent crowd, and we are very grateful for everyone attending. As a reminder, today we are here to have a short press conference in which we will discuss the events of last night, which during our peaceful vigil for calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, our protesters were violently assaulted by the police. The way this is going to work is we have three people who were on the ground during the events last night. They will be speaking and answering questions. With us, we have Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg of the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinical Council. We also have Eva Borgwardt, the national spokesperson for IfNotNow, and Dani Noble, who's an organizer with Jewish Voice for Peace Action. Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg will be starting us off with a quick statement. Then we have a very short video we'd like to show you. And then Eva and Dani will be speaking. Following that, we will be opening it up to questions. Let's try to keep it fairly moving. And when you want to ask a question, I'm going to ask that people put up their Zoom hands, if that works for folk. We also will be able to share afterwards a video compilation that we have from the footage that our people who are on the ground took, which also confirms everything that we'll be discussing. So, unless I have missed something from any of my colleagues, let's begin. Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, if you could kick us off, please.
Thank you so much, Sonya, and thank you all for being here. Last night, together with my congregants and my community, we came together to have a candlelight vigil at the Democratic National Headquarters to pray for all the lives lost in Gaza and in Israel, to pray for the hostages to be freed and come home. And that act of peace and moral act of civil disobedience was violently shut down by police who escalated against us and injured 90 of our community members. We were here in honor and inspired by civil rights organizers, generations of SNCC and LGBTQ organizers, the late John Lewis, who wanted us to see us make good, necessary trouble. We were there lighting candles for all who have died, honoring the lives lost, to call for a ceasefire to honor those lives in prayer and in song. And instead of being able to actually talk to our elected officials and pray with them and sing with them and ask them for a ceasefire, the police shoved our people down the steps. I'm caring for my congregants with a concussion, who've been tear gassed, who are devastated this morning, in addition to all the lives lost, are dealing with their own pain and trauma now of this violence from the police. And we are going to continue through that to call for a ceasefire.
Thank you, Rabbi Jessica. We'll show the video real quick. It's a short video that summarizes the events of last night. We'll have two more statements and then we'll open it up for questions.
I am one of hundreds of parts of the 80% of the Democratic base that are calling for a ceasefire, multi-racial, multi-faith, and we gathered last night to bring our message to the Democratic National Committee, because clearly after a month of thousands of phone calls, peaceful marches, demonstrations, nonviolent demonstrations in congressional offices, making our call for ceasefire clear and bringing home to Democratic leadership that 80% of their base support a ceasefire and an end to the loss of life. Democratic leadership and the Democratic Party is not aligned and is not listening to us. And so we went last night arm in arm to sing, to again light candles in memory of the dead, and to attempt to engage actually with Democratic leadership as they were coming into the building. And instead of actually engaging with us to actually answer our questions about why our own supposed elected officials and representatives are ignoring the calls of 80% of their constituents that support a ceasefire and have been making that very, very clear, instead of engaging with us, myself and all the people around me, 90 of us were met with violence. We were met with police officers pulling people, including folks that I was alongside with, down the stairs, met with pepper spray to the face, met with actions that led to concussion. I myself treated several of my friends for tear gas in the face, about 4 people, and many, many more were also pepper sprayed. I'm sorry, excuse me. And so I want to make clear that we came last night, again, multiracial, multi-faith, hundreds of folks peacefully chanting and singing to make our demand of a ceasefire clear, because Democratic leadership has not listened to us for 1 month to really ask them to get in alignment with what 80% of their base, all of us who were there last night, are part of that 80%, what 80% of us are asking for, which is a ceasefire now.
Great. Thank you very much, Dani, and all of our speakers. Okay, so Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, Eva Borgwardt, and Dani Noble are now available to take questions. Folk can raise their Zoom hand, or you can also request to speak in the stack, and we will go from there. Okay, it would be great if people could put their affiliations. So we'll start with Christopher McGarrian from AP, and I will ask that other reporters who are raising your hands, please let us know which media outlet you are with. We'll start. Chris, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. It was mentioned earlier on the call how many injuries there were, that there were 90 injuries among the protesters. Can you be more descriptive of what kinds of injuries people suffered? Was anybody hospitalized? And then, I was curious to learn a little bit more about the comments that were made just by Dani on the political ramifications of this and the Democratic base, not being in alignment with the leadership. We're obviously going into an election year, so I'm interested in how you characterize the impact of this issue on the upcoming primaries and election.
I'm happy to take the first part of the question, and then maybe I'll pass it to Eva for you to take the second part. So as a person who was there again with hundreds of folks, again, multi-faith, multiracial coalition there last night, peacefully protesting, we did have 90 members of our peaceful protests that were injured by violent attacks from the police. And those included a peaceful protester was hit with bicycles by 2 different cops, 2 different police officers. A peaceful protester was pepper sprayed directly in the face by police and then dragged by a leg down the stairs, thrown onto the ground and shoved through a barricade. Police protester was punched in the face by a police officer and pepper sprayed within minutes of arriving. And I myself personally can attest to this, as I was one of the folks who, again, was at the entrance trying to engage Democratic leadership should they actually come into the event. At least 2 peaceful protesters' glasses were smashed by the police. Multiple peaceful protesters were shoved down the stairs and tackled onto the pavement by cops running at full speed. I also can personally attest to this. And I also will say another protester was choked and violently handled by 3 or 4 police officers at the same time, thrown into a brick wall into the ground. And then grabbed and picked up and thrown down the stairs. In addition, we have a person who is currently being treated for a concussion as a result of again, being handled and thrown to the ground by police officers. And I want to reiterate as well, again, as somebody who was part of the coalition of hundreds of multi-faith, interfaith, multiracial coalition that represent 80% of the Democratic base supporting a ceasefire last night, that the police did not give any warning of any of the actions that they took. So as somebody who was there along with my friends who are peacefully singing with our candles representing the dead, we were met with this violence, including pulling down the stairs and throwing onto the pavement without any warning by police. I'll pass it to you, Eva.
Thanks, Dani. And yes, I also witnessed a lot of that police violence. In terms of the question about the election, let me just say, first of all, as a Jewish person in America, I am terrified of Donald Trump and of the far right movement that he represents. I actually worked for Joe Biden and Mark Kelly and the Democratic Coordinating Committee in 2020 in the state of Arizona, which the Democrats only won by like a little over 10,000 votes. And I worked around the clock because I was terrified of the alternative. And I thought that the Democratic Party was the party of peace and treating people equally and cared about justice. And we were there today as 80% of the Democratic base asking the Democratic Party to stay true to its values, the values that we elected them on, and value Palestinian lives and Israeli lives equally, treat all lives as sacred, and call for a ceasefire now. I am terrified about the implications of the past month of being ignored by our leaders and last night's extremely violent response from Democratic leadership, which was that Capitol Police turned away these peaceful protesters that represented 80% of their base. As somebody who has personally worked to mobilize voters, particularly young voters, to vote for the Democratic Party in these elections. I know how crucial motivation and faith in the party is to being able to turn out people to vote. And right now, like, I know so many young voters and including Jewish voters who are looking at the actions of our Democratic leadership and like being completely horrified and disillusioned by the response of our party to refuse to call for a ceasefire and end this horrific war.
Great. Thank you so much, Eva and Dani. We'll turn to the stack real quick. So next question is David Weigel from Semaphore.
Hello, thank you. A question about the intent of the protest and how members of Congress described it. I was also there. It was very clear that people were standing in front of entrances and not trying to enter. Brad Sherman and Kat Kamek and Marco Rubio said that they were, Sherman being the one person in the room. I think Jake Auchincloss also in the building. Could you just tell me, to get into a little bit of what the whole run of show for the protest was, because the entrances were all, as far as I could see, all closed by protesters. But was there any intent for people to enter the building? What was the intent of people blocking off these entrances until they were moved by police?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Thank you so much, David.
Mm-hmm.
Our intent in blocking various entrances was to make one path for congresspeople and elected officials coming and going so that we could speak to them. We have been calling their offices every day for months, desperately trying to get meetings. I've been trying to get meetings with my representatives, often ignored, very frequently ignored. And so we tried to make one way for people to enter and exit the building so that we could talk to them, so that they would see our signs and our candles and hear the voices of people calling for a ceasefire. As Dani mentioned, the police officers gave no dispersal warning, just physically violently pushed people away. So we did not get to have the conversations we wanted to have with our elected officials that we came to have, which is incredibly distressing on top of everything else that the elected officials continue to try to ignore us and now slander what we were there to do, which was to engage them in good faith conversation about when they will call for a ceasefire.
Thank you. We'll go to Gary from NBC for the next question.
I'm actually going to pass the baton to Gabe Gutierrez at NBC News, my colleague. That's okay.
Absolutely.
Hi there. Thank you for doing this. Gary, you can go ahead and ask your question if you'd like. But I guess you say that 80% of the Democratic base is behind calling for a ceasefire. Look, the Biden administration has made it very clear where it is. And I guess my question to you is, you referenced your opposition to the candidacy of Donald Trump, obviously. what is your biggest concern moving forward into the 2024 election? Would not supporting the Biden administration going into 2024 essentially hand the election to Donald Trump, who you say you detest?
I'll share my perspective again as an electoral organizer who has worked in swing states to deliver the election for Biden. I am terrified of a Trump win. I want Democrats desperately to win in 2024. What we are saying is that when our Democratic leadership is refusing to call for a ceasefire, a de-escalation, a release of the hostages, and end this horrific war that 80% of the base oppose, I am so worried about the motivation of the Democratic base and voters to turn out to vote in 2024. And so I would ask that question to our Democratic leadership and to Joe Biden and say, as a Jew in America who is terrified of Donald Trump, how can you invoke Jewish safety, our safety, in doing something that could throw this election to the Republicans and to the far right? We need you, which is one of the many reasons we need you to call for a ceasefire now.
Thank you. Next up, we'll hand it to Brian Metzger from Business Insider.
Hi there. Thanks so much for doing this. Going back to the claims that were made by some lawmakers, I guess I wanted to sort of put the question directly to you all for you to sort of say if it was true or not true. Several were claiming that you all, or that some of the protesters involved, were trying to break into the building. Did you at any time see anyone, whether that action was sanctioned by you all or not, trying to get into the building?
I can take that question. I just want to reiterate that the misinformation that has been spread by several elected officials is extremely dangerous, and I would put it upon them to actually produce evidence to support those claims. As someone, again, that was joining the hundreds of folks last night from an interfaith multiracial coalition representing 80% of the Democratic base calling for a ceasefire, and as somebody who was peacefully protesting and singing with those, I can tell you for a fact that going off of what Rabbi Jessica said, we were there to engage our elected officials who clearly have not been listening to the calls and actions that we've been taking over the past month. And absolutely in no instance did anyone try to enter the building. And spreading misinformation to the contrary is extremely, extremely dangerous. We were there peacefully singing, and chanting, waiting for Democratic officials to show up so that we could actually engage and bring our message of why are you not aligned with the 80% us, right, in your base who are calling for a ceasefire, and instead of actually engaging with us, we're met by severe police violence, as we have alluded to, without warning. So at no point did anyone try to enter the building.
Thank you. I'm worried that we might have missed some hands, but the one hand that I do see up right now for questions is Lawrence Fora from The Hill.
Hi, thank you again for doing this today. I was just wondering if you could provide a timeline of what happened last night. At what time did you arrive at the DNC, and then how long after that did police arrive, and when it was all wrapped up by?
Rabbi Jessica, do you like to speak to this?
No, I was going to say you should speak to this, Dani.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that was Lauren. So as I said before, and as Rabbi Jessica has alluded to, hundreds of us gathered to bring our message to the Democratic National Committee last night to represent the 80% of the Democratic base that supports a ceasefire. And many of us have been, again, thousands of phone calls demonstrating peacefully throughout this month, and those calls have not been heeded by Democratic leadership. And so with the intention of engaging Democratic leadership who were attending this event, we arrived close to actually the event start itself, with the intention of engaging some officials. And so we began singing, etc., and positioning ourselves to be able to actually talk to officials as they were walking in. So that was, the event started around 7 p.m. So that was around there. I will say, as someone, again, who was peacefully protesting along with many of my friends, and who was bringing, 11,000 candles representing the dead. I will say that I actually did see there were several Congress people that were arriving, and my friends attempted to actually engage them, and they were ignored. And so that was towards the start of the event at 7. And unfortunately, again, like I said, instead of following what is decades-long protocol for nonviolent protests and peaceful protests in the United States, and also for us who have been engaging in these peaceful protests, the protocol, right, is that there are specific people from our team who are called police liaisons, who are basically selected to peacefully, again, represent peaceful nonviolent protesters to speak with the police. And instead of actually engaging with those individuals, right, to make the police's intentions or requests clear, police refused to speak with our police liaisons, and instead, shortly into the nonviolent protest and singing and candle lighting, about 10 to 15 minutes in, without warning and without speaking to police liaisons and without any sort of order to disperse or request or anything, proceeded to violently pull our people and throw them down the stairs, and take their bikes and proceed to roll over the electric candles representing the dead. That proceeded again. That proceeded for another about hour or so, as peaceful protesters attempted to, again, try to make the message clear to Democratic leadership in a way that we have not been able to do by any other peaceful nonviolent means, and so remained to try to nonviolently engage with Democratic leadership, and were not able to do that. And that proceeded for about an hour and a half. I don't know if anybody wants to follow up.
I just want to add, thank you for that, Dani, that a really beautiful part of the demonstration that we brought last night, in addition to the candles, was projecting onto the side of the wall of the building, calling for a ceasefire, honoring the lives lost, naming that we are all children of light. This is in contrast to the genocidal rhetoric coming from the right-wing Israeli government right now. And just to say, like, in contrast to the distortion that we were trying to get into the building, we were holding peaceful space outside of the building and using a whole range of nonviolent ways to demonstrate and show, through light, through candles, through song, through projection, our message, so that it would be very clear. And it is so distressing to me as a rabbi to see my community and my congregants be lied about in this way, for our intent to be distorted in this way. And I want to ask that that we continue to listen to the voices of people calling for a ceasefire, which, as we say, are 80% of the Democratic base. And that's what we were there highlighting in so many different ways last night.
Thank you. Next question is Ben Samuels from Haaretz.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for doing this. 2 questions. So you mentioned that, you've had a police liaison that's been in coordination with forces before. Why do you think last night led to such a violent episode, whereas other actions have not in the past? And also, my second question, is legal action being considered right now, either against Capitol Police or any of the lawmakers or anyone involved? Thanks.
I can speak. Would you like to speak to that, Eva, or do you want me to?
I can speak to the first part. Sorry, could you reiterate the second part of the question, Ben?
Yeah, are you guys considering legal action against either Capitol Police or any of the lawmakers that have spread what you allege to be libelous claims or anything like that?
I can speak to the first part about why this protest was to the question about, like, why do we think that this protest escalated so quickly? I mean, from my personal perspective, I don't know. Like we were engaging in civil disobedience. I've been at many protests this month where we've engaged in like nonviolent tactics of civil disobedience. And I personally have never seen such a like fast and violent escalation by police with no warning. Protesters were singing in front of the door to the DNC, and almost immediately, the police were trying to like tear them off of each other and shove them down the stairs. And then the peaceful protesters that were assembled in the street, again, we were holding candles to represent the Palestinian lives lost, and officers were shoving everyone out of the street with their bicycles with no warning or explanation. And so I don't understand why this escalated so quickly, because like this, again, this was a nonviolent protest using similar tactics I've seen used all month.
And I'll just follow up with the answer to the second part of your question. I think that was Ben. Right now, we're, again, as somebody who was present there with the hundreds of us that were peacefully and non-violently protesting to make our demands of a ceasefire clear to Democratic leadership, we're focused on taking care of the 90 folks that were injured in court, including one person that was concussed, and several people that are dealing with their injuries related to the protests and that were caused by, again, unwarned, unprompted police violence. And we're not considering any, there are no discussions about legal actions happen this time. We're just focusing about making sure that people are cared for.
Great, thank you. We're I'm gonna read Nick's role from the AFP's question out loud and pass it on over. And Arthur, I see your hand is up. If you could just please rename yourself or flag in the chat which media agency you're representing, that would be great. From the AFP, the question is, I'm picking up from my colleagues covering the night shift last night and seeing that police reported 6 injuries among their own officers, quote, ranging from minor cuts to pepper spray to being punched, quote. What actually happened there?
Again, as we have photos and videos that make this that confirm what many of us saw last night, which is that members of our group were pepper sprayed by police officers, and we have photos that are documenting this. And there were witnesses who saw police officers pepper spray other officers accidentally. And police were like wielding and moving the giant barricades around protesters and each other. So again, it's possible something could have happened there. We don't know. All we saw was that police were the only ones we saw using violence yesterday, and particularly their use of pepper spray on protesters is well documented in photo and video from last night.
Great, thank you. And Arthur Delaney from HuffPo.
Thank you so much for organizing this. I came in late, so I'm very sorry if someone already asked about the description of events from Congressman Sean Casten. Did you guys already hear about that? Can I read it to you? He said on Twitter, I was just evacuated from the DCCC office and the building was surrounded by protesters who had blocked all modes of ingress and egress. In another tweet, he said, blocking all entries to a building with multiple members of Congress in it, protected by Capitol Police officers who have lived through January 6th, is putting you and other innocent people at risk. We were rescued by armed officers who did not know the protesters' intent. They only knew that members of Congress were inside, could not leave, and the protesters wouldn't let police through. Forcing police to guess intent is irresponsible and dangerous. What is your reaction to what that congressman said?
I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead, Rabbi Jessica.
I am so deeply disappointed that our elected officials who have a responsibility to present a moral authority in our country are spreading this kind of misinformation. We were so clear why we were there. Every person was wearing a t-shirt that said "Ceasefire now," lighting candles and singing. And we have been there. We have been here singing these same songs for a month. They knew very well why we were there. We were seated, locked arms with banners, And the moment that a dispersal order was given, the police had all the tools that they needed to peacefully, to non-violently and safely remove protesters. And instead, they chose to push people and shove people and hit and pepper spray. The police have tools to deal with nonviolent civil disobedience, and last night they chose not to use them. And I want to know why. I want someone to ask them why. Why, when DC police are well trained in working with and protest, this happens every day of the week here, and instead of following their protocol of working with our police liaisons and safely removing protesters who are engaging their right to protest, instead they pepper sprayed and kicked and pushed and pulled people's hair while we lit candles and prayed and sang.
So they gave a dispersal order and then didn't wait for people to disperse, or they just went straight for the physical rough stuff.
That's right.
I just want to just reiterate, because I know that you were late, Arthur, as well. Again, speaking as somebody who was there along with hundreds of other folks that were peacefully singing, lighting 11,000 candles in memory of the dead, representing the 80% of the Democratic base that supports a ceasefire. As one of the protesters that were there, I can say with total confidence that, just going off of what Rabbi Jessica said, this is something that is very routine. Many of us have been doing this for many, many years, and the police officers are well acquainted. They knew exactly what our message was, etc. An example of the confusion and disappointment that we feel and frustration that we feel about why we were given no notice or no effort to peacefully inform us what we needed to do to maintain our peaceful protest. The police officers refused to engage with our designated police liaison, which is a very typical, understood norm in civil disobedience and peaceful protest that we have seen over and over again in the past month and for decades. And those police refused to speak with that person. And that is extremely disappointing and dangerous. In addition to that, as one of the people that, again, was at the entrance, holding space non-violently, attempting to, again, engage with Congress people should they come into the event, because we have been sending thousands of phone calls, demonstrating, doing all sorts of delegations to congressional offices in the past month demanding a ceasefire. And we needed to bring that message to Democratic leadership. And so as one of the folks that was peacefully at that area, I can say with total confidence that the police did not provide any warning. They did not provide any order of dispersal. They did not communicate at all. They refused to communicate with a police liaison and went straight to tearing folks down and pushing them into the pavement, dragging them down the stairs, and pushing them with bicycles in a violent way that then led to over 90 people in our peaceful protest being injured.
Did your group
Thank you,
include
Dani.
people who are
Arthur, I'm going to ask you to pause for a sec, just so we can keep the thing going. We'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Gary, you're up from NBC News. I see you in the stack.
Hey there, yes. The U.S. Capitol Police just released a statement just a few minutes ago, and they're saying that the group moved dumpsters in front of the exits and pepper sprayed our officers. Is that something that you guys did?
I did not see anything like that. And again, like in terms of the pepper spray, our activists, like the peaceful protesters, did not pepper spray the officers. We have photos of officers pepper spraying the peaceful protesters, and we have videos of the ways in which we were like blocking the entrances with allowing people to pass through, but like with folks who are singing and chanting with locked arms, and calling for a ceasefire to try to be heard by our representatives. And the only documentation there is of anyone using pepper spray is by the police. And we are extremely disappointed that the Democratic Party Brad Sherman and Marco Rubio are spreading misinformation about our nonviolent protest, but they have nothing to say about the US government's funding of violent Israeli bombs dropping on Gaza. And so to all of the journalists here, I would ask the journalists here to ask Marco Rubio and Brad Sherman to apologize for their comments calling protesters, including Jewish protesters with loved ones in Israel, pro-Hamas, and saying that we pepper sprayed police officers. They have produced zero evidence.
Does anybody else from the Dani or Jess, do you want to add anything at this point?
I just want to join in saying no, we did not pepper spray any police. We were there in song and prayer.
Okay, are there any follow-up questions? We'll give it to Niall from the Hill.
Hi guys, thanks for doing this, and I hope this isn't duplicating a question anyone else has asked, but Eva has mentioned a few times about photographs that you have of police pepper spraying protesters. Have those been, posted to social media, or can we see them? Is what I'm basically asking.
Some of those are on social media, and we will be sending out a drive with footage that confirms everything that we've been saying. And so as long as you've registered for this call, we will get that footage out to you.
Okay, thank you.
And we have a follow-up question from Arthur in the chat about how many people in our group were present at the October protest in the Cannon building.
I can speak to this. So as one of the hundreds of peaceful protesters that were there last night, again, making our message clear that we want a ceasefire, and that the Democratic leadership should listen to the 80% of their base that supports a ceasefire. We do not know exactly how many members of our community participated in the October protest in the Cannon building. But I will say that I myself did participate in that nonviolent action. And again, the nonviolent protest that we took last night as a community was an attempt after a month, as Rabbi Jessica has alluded to, of thousands of phone calls to our congressional representatives, dozens of actions in their home cities to make our demand of a ceasefire clear, and ask our elected officials to heed their constituents. 80% of their constituents call for a ceasefire, that we wanted to bring that message peacefully and non-violently to Democratic leadership. And instead of engaging with us at this event, we were met with violence.
Thank you, Dani. At this point, we're going to stop questions for now. Follow-up questions can be emailed to media@jvp.org. That's media@jvp.org. And otherwise, thank you all so much for coming. You will be receiving a drive with more photos and footage. And also, please do continue to look at the social media, including the link that Eva's dropped in the chat, where we will continue to produce footage that confirms everything that we discussed today. Very much appreciate all of your time, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.